safeguarding people may feel, oh, it's so scary, it's so negative. It can be, but if you can see the strengths in a family, if you can see the progress that's been made and you can recognize it, then that often can support the family to make changes for their children.
Welcome to our next episode of the About Safeguarding podcast. Today we have Janet joining us. Good morning, Janet.
Good morning.
How are you today?
I'm well, thanks. Enjoying the sun.
It's lovely, isn't it? Would you like to tell everybody a bit about yourself, your role?
Sure. Okay. My name is Janet Ayoola. I'm a social worker. So I've been a qualified social worker for coming up to 13 years now. Currently, I do a couple of things. I chair child protection conferences for a London borough, and I also do some independent social work on the side, which parenting assessments, age assessments, and anything really that comes my way.
Lovely. Would you like to talk us through your role as a social worker? How does it work? How do you work with other agencies, for example?
So since I qualified, I've always worked with children and families. But of course, when you work with children, you're working with everyone. So that often includes vulnerable adults. For the majority of my career, I've worked in child protection, and that's where I still am. And I love child protection. And in my role as a chair, I am independent of the social work team. So I'm there to be their critical friend, to ensure that the child protection plan is progressing, to raise any concerns if things aren't going the way we expect it to go. I'm also responsible for chairing the child protection conference.
It's a quite big, wide variety of things that you do. So talk to us, you mentioned the parental assessments. What's that?
Oh, so that's what I do as part of my independent work. So parenting assessments are often requested when children are subject to care proceedings. So when the local authority think that children are at risk of significant harm in their home, and perhaps they've gone through the child protection process and things are they're not changing, things are not making a difference, then they may decide to issue care proceedings to ask the court to decide what should happen for children, to make decisions. So that could be public, where the local authority is involved, or it could be private, perhaps when parents are separating and the courts need to make child care decisions. So the court may ask for an independent social worker to assess the child's circumstances. So that could either be in care proceedings, or it could be before we get to court. So something called pre-proceedings, when the local authority is trying to work with the family to avoid going to court. At that stage, they could ask for in-depth parenting assessment of the parent's capacity, and then they would ask an independent social worker like me to undertake that.
So what kind of questions or things do you look at? Is it like that?
Absolutely. So it's a holistic assessment. It's about getting the best picture of the parents' ability to care for their children. So you would meet with the parents in their home, talk to them about their childhood, get them to speak to you about their experiences growing up, what was good, and also perhaps what was difficult. Any particular questions that the local authority may ask or agree together. They're usually agreeing in something called a letter of instruction. That's when all parties agree what the independent social worker is going to cover. So I've really got to follow that and make sure in my evidence I am answering those questions. So perhaps if a family have had struggles with substance misuse or domestic abuse, then part of my work with the family is about ascertaining what those concerns are and what the impact on the children could be. I would also observe parents with their children just to get the idea of what the interaction is like, how they engage together. And then also I like to speak to other people, other family members who know the parents, who know how they parent, and get their views, as well as the children's views, as well as other professionals working with the family. So it really is a holistic picture of parenting capacity.
Wow, that's a big task to take.
It can be, yes.
Yes, and you know, I'm assuming there's lots of positive outcomes when you're doing that.
Absolutely. So often there are positive outcomes because you want to, you know, highlight the strengths. I like to take a strengths-based approach so that we know these are the strengths that the parent has. and perhaps they will have some deficits, but we can build on those, we can work on those. And usually at the end of the parenting assessment, I would give a number of recommendations to say, this is how the local authority could support the family better. So it's not about catching parents out, it's about giving parents the best opportunity to show what they can do and perhaps to ask for additional help where necessary.
Yeah, I think sometimes parents are still quite scared of social workers, aren't they?
Absolutely.
They think that that's it, their children are going to be taken away from them, when actually it's the opposite. They're trying to support. So
Yeah, so often. I mean, the Children Act 1989 is really clear that children are best placed, best cared for within their family network. And we know that to be the case. So actually, majority of my role is about keeping children together with their families if it's safe to do so. Of course, if it's not safe to do so, then we need to take, measured action. But the threshold is so high for removing children that actually in the majority of cases, that's highly unlikely.
And how just to go off a little topic, you talk about the thresholds there. Have the thresholds changed over time? Is it like higher now, or is it about the same as it always?
It's an interesting question, because obviously the Children Act is from 1989, so that it has changed, it's been updated and so forth, but it hasn't really changed in terms of threshold. Threshold is still significant harm.
Yeah.
However, I think in reality, we know that local authorities are under a great deal of pressure. And so often children and families are worked with outside of the statutory arena. So they may have early help services that they would work with. And in perhaps years gone by, those families in those circumstances would have been on child in need plans, for example, but now are worked with in the early help service. So I think as social workers and safeguarding professionals, we can see that thresholds are high. We can see the pressures on services. We want to support families, but often we just don't have the resources that we want. And then things get worse, and then we need to step in, and then they usually come to me in the Child Protection Conference.
So when it gets to Child Protection Conference, so we've put all in the early help and we're doing everything we can to support everybody. Do you want to tell everybody about what happens at a Child Protection Conference and what your role is?
Yeah. Well, Child Protection Conference can be really scary for people, for parents and some professionals actually. But it can be a really positive meeting if everything comes together. So a Child Protection Conference is convened after, usually the local authority will have what's called a strategy discussion. That is when they will have conversations with other professionals, the police, but also health agencies like health visitor, school nurse, any other professionals working with the family. And that is when there's reason to believe that a child may be suffering or may be at risk of significant harm. So that's the threshold in the Children Act I was referring to earlier. At that point, they'll have the strategy discussion and they will plan what's called a Section 47 investigation. And so that's a child protection investigation to ascertain whether there's evidence to support that. At the end of that investigation, they need to make a decision on an outcome. Is the child experiencing significant harm? And if so, do we need to convene a child protection conference or not? So if the answer is yes, the child is experiencing significant harm, in an initial child protection multi-agency conference needs to be convened, and that's where I come in. So I'm not involved in the strategy discussion and the Section 47 investigation, but I will come in at the point where we need to have the child protection conference. At the Child Protection Conference, parents are invited to come, and if they need any support, like a family member or an advocate or an interpreter, then that's my responsibility to make sure that they get all the support so that they can take part properly. And then we'll invite all the professionals working with the family. So again, we'll have the police from a unit called the Child Abuse Investigation Team. We will have the allocated social worker. We'll have someone from the school, usually the designated safeguarding lead, maybe a school nurse or a health visitor or both, a midwife if they're pregnant. So you can see there's a whole range of people there, and any voluntary agencies. If people are involved in community initiatives or they go to church or mosque, we could have people there supporting the family from their religious affiliation as well. So we can end up having quite a big meeting.
Wow. So what is your role then? Do you like coordinate it? Are you the one who makes the decisions at the end of the day? How
Yes, so I chair the meeting, so I'm responsible for making sure that all the information is assessed in that meeting. I work in a borough that uses the Signs of Safety framework. So
Yeah.
some of your listeners will be familiar with Signs of
Yeah.
Safety. And I usually have 3 boards behind me where I will say what's working well, what are we worried about, and what needs to happen next. They're the 3 questions really that
Yeah.
the Child Protection Conference answers. So in terms of what we're worried about, that's when we get all the information from police, from social worker, from schools to say this is what's happened in the past that's made us worried for a child's welfare. And then what's working well is important because the parent may be responding to the concerns. They may be saying, look, I've got family members who can support me so that you don't have to be worried about my child anymore. Things may already start to happen to make a change. So we need to talk about that and what's keeping the child safe at the moment. And then the next steps is the plan. So who's going to do what to keep the child safe? And then at the end of the plan, and we scale from 0 to 10, how safe is the child today? Who's worried? Who's not worried? And then all the professionals need to give a view as to whether the child is at risk, in their view, of significant harm and needs to be subject to a child protection plan or not, and they could be subject to a child in need plan. Some local authorities will say you can say no plan, no involvement at that point. Some local authorities will say, no, you've come to conference, you need a child protection plan or a child in need plan. So I've worked it both ways. But the ultimate decision is for the chair. So I often say in conference, it's not a democracy. I don't sort of count how many, votes there are as such. Yeah. But on the whole, most of the time, the chair will support what everyone else is saying. Parents can scale. I always encourage parents to scale. I always encourage parents to decide with us whether a child protection plan is needed. Some parents want to, some parents don't want to. It's actually really interesting to get the parents' view because sometimes parents recognize the concerns and so they scale similarly and they recognize that they need to make a change. Sometimes, oh, I'm a 10, I'm doing everything's perfect, you don't need to be involved. And then we're a little bit more worried, we're thinking, does the parent really understand what the worries are? And then, so that can give us an insight into what they understand. Yeah. But all professionals present must give a view. Yeah. And it sounds simple, but sometimes some professionals don't want to give a view. They don't want to because they don't want to alienate the family. Yeah. The only exception to that might be if you're working with a domestic abuse charity, they tend to take a stance to say they're not going to contribute to decision making. But if you're a school or a health visitor, then you have a statutory duty to do that. And then if a decision is made that a child is on a child protection plan, then they have to come back to review. So we review the plan first after 3 months and then every 6 months until we step down back to child in need. But I think the Child Protection Conference helps everyone to talk about what their views are and what is going wrong and what's going well. And then it just tightens up the plan. There's more scrutiny, there's more oversight. So people feel, it's strange, people feel safer, I think, after they've had one. Yeah. No, I've been to a few myself. You're right. Okay. That is the worst bit, isn't it? When you're asked, what do you think? And exactly pressure, because you don't want to get it wrong, obviously, but fundamentally it's your decision at the end. Yeah. So what advice would you say to people that come along to give evidence? What do they need to come to be prepared? Because you don't want people just turning up going, I was sent here. I've had that. I've just been sent here. I don't know why I'm here. What could they come with so they're prepared for the meeting? Okay, so obviously I think it depends, doesn't it, on how much involvement they've had with the family. Yeah. But let's say, for example, it was someone from a school. I would presume they've had some safeguarding concerns that they've recorded on their systems previously. They would need to produce a report. I say a report, it really is just answering those 3 questions. What are we worried about? What's working well? What needs to happen next? Yeah. Usually local authorities will have their own template that they need to provide that information on. But it's so important to share that with the family before you come to the meeting. Yeah. I mean, one of the things that, I find frustrating and families do is when there are surprises in the child protection conference, and there really ought not to be any surprises. Parents should go in having seen the reports, understood what the concerns are. They may not agree, and that's fine, but they should be aware of what people are going to say in advance. So I think part of preparation is definitely writing your report, sharing it with the family, sitting down face to face and saying, look, you know, I understand, you know, you may not agree, but these are the concerns. And actually, it's not my decision. It's the chair will ultimately make a decision, but we do need to discuss this. And this is what I need to do as a safeguarding professional. And most parents actually really understand that. They don't like it, they don't agree, but they prefer being upfront. They don't want the kind of, you know, smiles in front and then behind you're writing reports and saying that you're really worried. And that can be really undermining for families. So I think those are the two things I would definitely say in the way of preparation. Write your report, write all your concerns down, and then share that with the family.
Yeah, absolutely. No surprises. I think that is the best advice ever, because sometimes there is, and it is.
Everything blows up and it's so hard to bring it back.
You're sitting there going, oh my God.
Yeah.
Been there, a few of those has happened. Okay. So you say you're a social worker as well. So that is one of your roles. You're a social worker. Is that where you work with the children, like you said, in child protection? Is that all right? Is that right?
Yeah.
So, you know,
for local authority,
the local authority. So you know, are you one of those social workers that are, when we call up on the MASH team, are you one of those who are on the phone?
No, not at all. I'm much later down the stream. So I read all that information. They're really important because that all feeds into assessment. So I read all of that, but I'm much further down the line.
Right. So you're there to support the families. You know, you'll get a phone call and then you're allocated children. Is that right? Is that right?
I'm not allocated as such, but I will chair the conference. So I have my children who are on child protection plan, and I'm responsible for overseeing their plan, but I'm not the allocated social worker. So I'm in a quality assurance role. I'm overseeing what's being done.
Wow. Yes. So you're in charge. Let's just
not quite. Not quite. I support them.
So if we're talking about safeguarding as a whole, do you have like your 3 top non-negotiables for safeguarding?
Oh, my 3 top negotiables. In what context?
In just general, so in safeguarding, your role is, you know, as a chairperson for the conferences, when it comes to safeguarding as a whole, is there like 3 non-negotiables, right? You should always do this, you should always do this, you should always do this.
So definitely you always write things down. You must record. So, I mean, everyone will say that. If you didn't record it, it's as though it didn't happen. That's one of the things I always learned when I was newly qualified social worker. So you go on a visit, you must record things. Someone said something to you, record it as close to verbatim as you can. Get the person's views, gets the child's views. So absolutely, you must record things. The second thing I would say is that transparency and respect for the family. And sharing information with them, sharing information with other professionals to work together in a timely fashion. Definitely, that's number 2. And I think number 3 would be strengths, noticing strengths, because safeguarding is, people may feel, oh, it's so scary, it's so negative. It can be, but if you can see the strengths in a family, if you can see the progress that's been made and you can recognize it, then that often can support the family to make changes for their children. So those, I think, would be the 3 things.
That's great. Thank you very much. I think it's important to notice the strengths. It's very easy to notice all the negatives.
Absolutely.
Right, so I now have a question from a previous guest. It's an interesting one. Their question is, it says, with the development of AI, what do you see the safeguarding issues of the future, or if not already? That's a good one, isn't it?
Do you know, it is a good one, and I've wondered that. I did go to a lecture a few years ago when they were discussing it before AI really blew up. And one of the things that they were saying the difficulties were is how to maintain anti-oppressive practice if you're going to use technologies like AI, because as we know, information is not neutral. Information is value laden, power is not neutral. So we don't want to use our power in a way that we can oppress people. And I think the difficulty, as far my understanding of AI is a little bit limited, so bear with me. But my understanding is, if, for example, we were going to use AI to conduct assessments, and we were going to use, statistics to kind of try to predict who are the families who are going to cause the most harm to their children, for example, we could get into quite a tricky space, because we're not, how much are we using of professional judgment? And we saying, because statistically, you're more likely to harm your children, therefore we're going to take certain actions. And I think that is something that could end up being quite oppressive. So that's a challenge, I think. Absolutely, I'm not afraid of technology. We should use technology, but we have to do it in a way that is anti-oppressive.
Yeah, scary, isn't it?
It is scary.
I've never thought of it like that. When I think of AI, I think, how perpetrators could use it to groom children, for example.
Absolutely.
But you're right, I've never thought of it.
Yeah.
What point do we have to say stop?
Yeah.
Is there a point where we can't say stop? That is the question.
That's right. I know.
Very scary, isn't it?
It just keeps going and going, and it's very interesting. I don't know where it will go in the next 5 years or the next 10 years. Might be a very different landscape.
I think so. So do you have a question for our next guest?
Oh, okay. This is the bit I'm not sure. A question. Can I ask a very basic question?
You can,
like,
yeah.
what made you interested in safeguarding, and why did you continue to do the job?
Yeah.
Because I think sometimes, like I say, there's a lot of pressure in the roles, and people can feel overwhelmed. So what is it that keeps you here? What is it that keeps you going? I think I'll be curious about that.
It's a good question. Why do you keep going? It's a good question. Right. Well, thank you very much for sharing all your information.
That's okay.
A lot of people are going to learn from it today, because not many people know about social work or know about, conferences and things like that. So I think it's going to be really useful.
Fantastic.
So thank you very much for your time. Thank you.
All right then. Thank you. Thanks, Madeline.
Hi, thank you so much for listening to this episode. If you could all do me a favour and just click that subscribe button, that would be great. Thanks, bye.